Hello everyone. Today we have uh,
It's Giuliana.
Giuliana. Sorry if I don't know, I don't remember the names, but we are going to have a talk on usability
Yep.
or something. Very sorry, I did not read anything about it, but yeah, we'll give the stage to Giuliana.
All right. Is the mic okay? Okay. So hi everyone. My name is Giuliana, and I'm just going to present our Debian installer usability report that we've been working on over the past month. So it was me, Anthony Nadeau, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, and Tássia. So we're just going to tell you guys a little bit about the background, what our goal was, our setup and preparation, our results. We're going to do a little bit of a comparison with some other installers, and then we have a few suggestions at the end. So first is the background. So our usability refers to how easy user interfaces are to use. So in our case, we wanted to see how easily and clearly it was for users to install Debian. And in this case, we're talking about the standard installer, which is the net installer. And we also wanted to know how it could improve the installer and documentation to give users a better experience. Our testers were mainly new users with little to no technical experience, and we wanted to give them as little information as possible so that we could see how they would fare throughout the process. So for our setup, we had 10 testers. We had one pilot the week of, and then 9 testers. Our testers were mainly from the Computer Science Technology program at Vanier College in Montreal, Canada, and most of them had little to no technical experience, and we allocated 2 hours for each one. For the equipment, we had a 32 gigabyte USB key. We had a laptop that had both Windows and Debian on it, which was supposed to be used for our part 1, which is the research prior to getting to the installer. And then we had a Lenovo ThinkPad to do the installation itself and a router. So that's the room where we performed our test. So basically, the observer would sit in one of the chairs beside the tester, and we would just observe them as they went through our task list. So before our tests, we would greet the tester when they came in, and we would give them a consent form. So basically, it just has a little bit of information of what exactly we were doing, what the purpose was, what people would be asked to do, and stuff on confidentiality, just saying that it was mainly going to be anonymous. We don't include any names anywhere. So that's it for the consent form. After they signed the form, we then would give them a demographics form, which just had some simple questions like age, gender, language, occupation, operating system, installation of operating system, and then familiarity with Linux. And then after all of that, we would give them also our simplified task list, which is basically the list of tasks that they would use and go through for that. And we made sure to make it clear that we're not testing the tester, but the system and the documentation that we had. So this was our task list. So we have a part 1, which is basically before you get to the installer itself, you have to boot into it. So first was to download the ISO, then we would verify the checksum, then verify the signature, flash the ISO into the USB key, and then boot from the USB key. For part 2 is everything that has to do with the installer, so selecting the installation type, language, location, keyboard, whether it was a wireless interface or not, host name, domain name, all of that stuff is all through the installer. And then for part 3, it was just a little bit of exploration. So they would boot into the operating system they just installed and try to change the desktop, open a couple windows, play around. And that was it for the task list. And before they actually started, we would explain to them exactly what we were doing there. and we would ask them what operating system they would like to use for part 1, and that's it. And then we would start the test. So when we started, we would first start a timer. They would go through the simplified task list, and then they would just start. So the observer would be there to help in case there were any problems, but the whole point was to let them do as most as they could with the simplified task list that we provided. So we just observed. We would ask them questions, and they would explain to us what they were doing to make it easier for us to understand their train of thoughts and all that. And then when needed, we also prepared 3 other level of helpers. So we had a verbose task list, which is mainly an explanation of the task list. We would have hints and then tutorials in case they couldn't get it done. So I think it's this one. Yeah, so this is the little table that we had for each one. So for example, task 2, I think, is to verify the checksum. So for example, if they didn't know what a checksum was, they could come here and they would find an explanation. So yeah, that's basically what the verbose looked like. And then we also had a hint here. And then the hint, we give a little bit more explanation. So in that case, we would say, on Windows, you can use the command certutil to verify a checksum. And on Linux, you can use SHA-512-SUM to do that. And then if that still wasn't enough, then we would then give them the tutorial, which is a step-by-step, like the exact command to run. And then that would be that. Okay. So we also let them use internet searches and watching any online video tutorials. So if during, for example, they're at the task and they want to try doing it all on their own, they would search up on Google how to verify a checksum, and then they would get an answer. Or they could ask, and we would give them more hints. Yeah, so we took notes and we observed and saw why they were struggling, and whoop, sorry. Is that okay? I'll just hold it. Yeah. Yeah, so then we would write down their struggle points and any feedback that they might have for us. Before I get to the results, does anyone have any questions about this part?
You mentioned that your users are doing computing already. Were you using the ability for the user to download and understand how to actually create installation media as a start point for your usability scoring? So were you weighting your results based on how computer literate they were in the first place?
Sorry, just 1 second.
No problem.
Sorry, Andy. I think that's good.
It might be my glasses.
Oh, I see. Let me just bend this a little bit more. That. And I think you're all good.
All right, thank you.
Going on
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So you've mentioned that you were observing users downloading an image, performing a checksum and bits and pieces to actually confirm they've got a good download.
Yep.
Are you planning on using? Did you plan on using that as a weighting scale to see how computer literate the original user is in the first place?
Well, the whole point is that if a new user was installing Debian at home, they would have to do all that by themselves. So I guess by going to the Debian website and downloading it, there we would just want to see if they're able to find the proper ISO to download. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, well, they can find the proper download to install, but obviously they need to be sufficiently literate on the computer system that they are downloading it to in order to actually produce the image. And I'm wondering, were you using this information to almost grade the user's starting skill level as part of. Is that something you're planning on using as part of the experiment?
Well, not exactly. That wasn't really the point. It was just, I guess.
Okay, so yeah.
So we asked them. So part of the demographics form there was a question how literate they were. So that we didn't measure, and then because also the sample size we had, only 10 volunteers, 9 at the end, that were used for the test, for the results. We didn't actually take any conclusion on particular groups of advanced users, or so.
Yeah, we used one group for the test, which was college students that had little or no experience with Linux and just this kind of stuff in general. So we didn't really have to measure. We kind of knew where they were at. Some people varied, obviously, but we were mainly expecting not a lot of experience with this stuff.
In the results, you're going to see the demographics, but it was a very particular group already.
Yeah.
I guess the reason I'm asking for this is if you're a Windows user, you're not used to checking whether your Windows installs checksums are good.
Exactly.
You're not used to downloading anything. You just download it, assume it works, and when it doesn't work, go, oh, this is crap, and move on.
Yeah.
Where you're asking users here to actually perform more steps than they would normally do in a non-Linux environment. They should do it in a non-Linux environment. They should go back and check to make sure the checksums match. That's something that is above and beyond, perhaps, what...
Well, the reason we asked them for the checksum and the signature in the first place is because we were following what was on the website, right? So if you click the download button here, and it'll take you to this page, which says that to download the checksum and all that. So it kind of hints at that you should go ahead and check all of that before you continue. So that's why we included those steps. It wasn't really to grade anybody's experience. It was just to see if they would be able to do it with the information that we have on the website itself. All right, so any other questions? Okay, so I'll continue. So for our results, so the average time taken to complete it was 1 hour and 42 minutes, and about half of that time was needed only for part 1. So here's a little bit of our demographics. So we had 9 people, 8 of those people were college students, and 1 was a designer. So here we have, let me make this a little bit smaller. There, so yeah, most of them were computer science students, but like in their earlier years. And then for the ages, most of them were 18, 19, with a little bit of variation. 67% of them were male, and most of them had English as a first language, and then some other varying ones. And most of them, as you can see, 78% of them had no experience whatsoever with Linux. And then it seemed like they had some experience with operating system installation, which I take that would be Windows, because nobody had any experience with Linux before. And here I'm going to show you guys the heat map. I think that's, is it? I'm just gonna, what is happening? Okay. All right, so here are the tasks that we had from part 1, part 2, and part 3, and then these are our testers over there. So for task 1, for example, the image download, it was mainly very easy. People were able to find it easily. They didn't need any help. And then you see the pain points are really for the checksum and signature verification. Just 2 to 5 in general were kind of struggle points, which we had already anticipated because this wasn't something that people have a lot of experience with, especially considering they were Windows users. And then part 2, which is the actual installer procedure, went very well with some exceptions, like the installation type. There was some confusion there. Same thing for disk partitioning, host name and domain name, and the network mirror. And for part 3, everything went very well. So as they booted into the system, everything was very intuitive, and they were able to do whatever they had to do with no issues. So that's for the heat map. So now I'm just going to do a little bit of a comparison with some other installers. So first we have Tails. So we took a look at their documentation, and here's what we found. So the Tails project is very organized, and there's a lot of steps that are easy to understand. So first of all, they have this 1 to 4 step, which would be our part 1, which is to download Tails. You click the button there, and it automatically downloads the image. And then here you have a verifier download. So unlike our website, for example, they have a tool that verifies your download. So you would select the file, and then they would tell you whether it was properly downloaded or not. If it was bad, it would tell you verification failed, which is very useful, especially for new users who don't necessarily know how to go through that process. And as for the installation, basically, if you're installing from Windows, they have these little pictures instead of like written steps that show you. So they said, you know, download Tails, verify your download, and then to flash the USB key, they tell you that you can use Balena Etcher. And so they provide these little images for the steps. And then once you actually got to booting into the system, you have their installer. Let me make that. What? Okay. But they don't ask a lot of questions, so I guess it's not really an installer because it's a live system, but basically all they ask is language, keyboard, and if you want persistent storage, you could check that there. And then if you're a more expert user who wants, I guess, more configuration power, there's also a little bit further than this. But it's very simple. There are not a lot of questions to answer, and this is stuff that everybody knows. So that's it. So overall, Tails had like very good documentation in terms of helping new users or people who don't have experience get through it. And now for Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is also a lot like Tails. They have documentation on how to do the whole of part 1 and part 2. And they also show you how to verify your download. So I think it's down here. Maybe not. Yeah, it's down here. So this is a little step-by-step on how to do the installation. So they have the download the image, create bootable USB stick, etc. So you click on each one, and it'll give you an explanation of what you need to do. And to verify the checksum, they show you different ways to do it, and they take also into consideration the operating system you're on. So for Windows, they say, you know, you can use WSL. So for Windows, instead of showing how to do it on, for example, CMD, they show you how to get WSL installed, which, in our opinion, was very cool because then it also encourages the use of Linux tools even as a Windows user. And yeah, and then they also, for example, creating a bootable USB stick, which isn't something a lot of people know how to do. They also tell you, you know, you can install Balena Etcher, and from there, everything is clear. And unlike Tails, Ubuntu doesn't have a tool that's integrated in the website to check the download, but they offer more than enough documentation, tutorials, and to help the user do it themselves. And something that also we thought was very nice was that their UI, it emphasizes the important elements. So, for example, it makes buttons colorful or bigger, etc., which makes it easier for users to find information they're looking for without having to do a lot of reading. And as for the installation, it's also very simple. They ask very few questions as well. So basically, their language, keyboard, you choose your installation type, which in this case, unlike our Debian installer, doesn't ask graphical installer or install. It's disk partitioning. So here it tells you you can erase the entire disk and install Ubuntu. And then if you want to choose your partitions yourself, you can also click on something else over here. And then you have more power to do whatever you want with your partitions. And then for your user setup, for example, it asks for your name, your computer's name, and all of that. So yeah, so overall, Ubuntu also, the conclusion was that it was also able to offer users all they need to do the steps that they need to do in order to have the system. We didn't perform a test on Ubuntu, obviously, so this is all, I guess, speculation from what we've seen and the comparisons that we did. But yeah. And last, we have Fedora for operating system, or distribution, sorry. So here, Fedora and Ubuntu have very similar UIs, as in they use web design elements and stuff like that to just make the stuff that is important pop out to you, which also makes it easier to just see and find things without having to read a lot of text. And they also have a tutorial on how to verify your download, but unlike unlike Ubuntu, it's only on Linux. So it doesn't show you how you would do this on a Windows machine. And for example, if you have to get GPG, it's also not anywhere. So, but they do have a little bit of a tutorial. Fedora doesn't have a lot more documentation. It's pretty much all there. And for the installation, again, it's also simple. There is language, keyboard, and then it sets the date and time based on your location, which is there. You can pick like a pin on a map. I didn't take a picture for that, but you would click on the location on a big map, and then it would set your location to there. And then that's all. And you can also use it while it's installing, which is something that all of the other ones seem, I think, have that too. But yeah, the installation type overall is very simple for all three of these distributions. And then we also have Calamares here, which kind of follows suit. So you have the menu, which has the steps. So it's also just location, keyboard, and when you get to partitioning, something that we personally thought was a nice little feature was that you can see the bar with your partition. So it shows you what it's going to look like, which is easier to visualize. And then it also has, for example, erase disk, and then it'll delete everything on it. And then there's manual. Anyways, there's different options there. And lastly, this just shows another way of asking for, I guess, account and user setup. Okay, so now we're got to discussion and suggestions. So these are just some of the conclusions and suggestions that were inspired by our observations during the test. But to make it clear, we didn't think of how hard or complex, or even if it was possible of implementing them. These are really just some brainstorming that we did after seeing the results of the test. So for part one, first thing is that most testers assume that the ISO is automatically downloaded after pressing the big download button. So if we go here, and you're here, you press the download button, right? And it says, thank you for downloading Debian. So a lot of our testers thought that that meant it was downloaded, but it wasn't. You actually had to go and click on the net installer link there. So that was one thing. None of our testers were able to complete tasks 1.2 and 1.3, which is verifying the checksum and the signature easily. So for verifying the signature, all of them needed a tutorial. And for verifying the checksum, they were able to find it like tutorials online or videos or things like that. And we think that maybe the documentation provided may not be sufficiently clear or have all the information needed to be able to install the system for specifically the new users with no prior experience. And lastly, the documentation also mentions checksums and signature and more technical concepts that are not common knowledge and that people don't necessarily understand. And that was a little bit of also a pain point, because the testers would read and they would look at me or whoever else was there observing, and they would be a little confused. And we were not to provide any clarifications beside the documentation that we prepared. And Google tutorials and YouTube tutorials were often used. For part two, there was a little bit of confusion between graphical install and install. There was also a little confusion between difference of WEP and WPA when it comes to the network configuration, and confusion also of what do I put for host name, domain name, network mirror, and HTTP proxy. Because again, these are not common knowledge. And part 3, the testers had difficulty finding the applications button on the GNOME desktop environment. So I'll show you. Wait. So just that. I guess it's activities. Yeah. So overall, we discovered some improvements that could be done to both the install and the documentation associated to it that we thought maybe would be a good idea to welcome these different people with different backgrounds, especially people that don't have any experience. So we also used the comparisons with the other distros and Calamares for this. So the first thing was to modify the wording and explanations on the documentation to make it more easily understood by people with no technical background. So for example, there's a little explanation, I think it's here, for verifying So here there's an explanation. So one idea would be, for example, when you're in a Wikipedia page, you're reading an article, there might be a highlighted word that's complicated, and that if you click on it, it'll take you to another page explaining what that means. So that was one idea that we thought might be a good idea, like what is done here with the Debian GPG keyring. So you click on it, it takes you to another page with more information on it. And another thing is to section documentation in parts that are more easily visualizable by the user. So here we have just a lot of text, and if you go again to verify the checksum, this is supposed to be both for the checksum and the signature, but they're all kind of together. So our testers were confused a bit about the difference and what exactly they had to do for that. So that would be, so for example, the tails, like I showed before, it had different images with the steps. So that would maybe be a good idea for them to see exactly what they need to do and the different steps to accomplish in like an easier way. And the Ubuntu one was also a good example. So it had tutorials linked to tools that could be used. For example, I had a little link to Balena Etcher when it comes to flashing a USB key. And if we ask users to verify the download with the checksum, it's to also specify what algorithm was used. Here, it's a little obvious because it says, SHA-512 sum, so we know that it's SHA-512. But for new users, they don't necessarily know what that means. They thought it was just name of the file. So whenever they would get the checksum on, I guess, the Linux command line or the Windows command line, they would default to SHA-256. So they'd be confused as to why it doesn't match. And these two files, they're as SHA-512 sums and then signature. So just something simple that might make this easier would be to rename this to the checksum. So then you have a checksum and a signature. Or to leave this as SHA-512 sum and this, for example, as SHA-512 signature. So just make it a little bit more consistent. And just overall adding different links to tools and having some tutorials to just help this be an easier experience. And also account for users of different operating systems like Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So although there is the installation guide that provides all of this information, some of our testers clicked on it and there was a lot of text and it was very hard to get through, and it was hard to find the information they were looking for, so they ended up leaving and not looking at that. One other little suggestion that's just a nice feature but small would be just to have a navigation bar no matter where you go. So it's just a little convention that way, no matter which page the user goes, they can always go back to the bar and find whatever else they want to go. So in terms of the installer, so by comparing it to the different installers, we also have some discussion points and some changes that we thought could bring about some valuable changes to the installer. So first is to maybe separate it into a simple installer and an advanced installer. So Calamares, for example, asks a few questions like language, location, keyboard, user creation, and partitioning. And then you have an advanced installer for people that want more customization powers and stuff like that. And because most people tend to skim through text, we also thought that a significant change would be to just put important text in bold or in a different color or something like that. And because of the confusion between graphical installer and installer, another suggestion would be to maybe rename those to graphical installer and legacy installer, which makes it a little bit more obvious that the installer legacy install option is for a headless system. And lastly, for the desktop environment choice, so once you get to selecting your software, you can pick your desktop environment. We also thought something cool maybe would be to have a little preview of what your desktop would look like with the different environments. So for example, you can have a little picture of the GNOME and then another one for KDE Plasma and etc. And that way they can actually see the difference and know what they're choosing instead of just going with the default. And this is a personal suggestion by me and my other teammate, Anthony. So brainstorming, we thought it would also be nice to get a little recognition on the Debian themes, which in the initial setup menu, it looks like this. So it gives you the option to pick a keyboard and other things like link your Google or whatever account is there. And we thought it might be cool as well to have a little screen at the end about themes, either having links to documentation about themes or showing different themes, and just so users know that they exist. And that is it. So just a little thank you to our pilot tester and all of our other testers, our Debian contributors and sponsors that gave us the budget to acquire the material needed, so our ThinkPad laptop for the installation. Thank you to Vanier College for the physical and network space, and to the computer science department at Vanier for the router, and to the observers and contributors, and thank you for listening. And that is all.
Thank you, Giuliana, for the talk. And do we have oh, yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. That was really illuminating. I think the biggest takeaway I'm getting from this is we really need to improve the process of how to actually obtain the image in the first place and guide people from that. And within the installation process, we just want a just install, get on with it.
Yep.
Don't ask for anything else. Absolute bare minimum install as a single button, nice and quick. You then had something that you were saying towards the end of the thing where you were saying people had difficulty, particularly in GNOME, in working where they need to click to actually start and launch an application. I do wonder what would happen if you gave somebody who has never used Windows before and has only ever used GNOME, or for that matter, KDE or LXQT or any of the other desktop environments. I wonder whether they would have exactly the same difficulty in finding it on Windows. The question there is it a familiarity thing?
Finding what on
Windows? The application launcher.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you said the activities and bits and pieces. I do wonder whether if you've got somebody who has not used a Windows environment before, whether they would have the same difficulty coming from Linux, from a Linux desktop to a Windows or to an Apple desktop.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. One of our testers was a macOS user, so we let people choose what laptop they wanted for their research. So 8 of our 9 testers chose Windows, but the one person who was a macOS user actually chose the Debian one, so he did all of part 1 on Debian. And it was a much smoother process in terms of commands, because on Windows, for example, to run a GPG command, you have to install all of the dependencies, which is just an extra step. But for Linux, it was already there, so all I had to do is run the GPG command, for example. And as for what you asked about the activities button on top, it didn't really seem to be a problem. They saw it was there and they clicked on it. So it's really more of a thing regarding Windows user. We've focused more on that, firstly because our group of testers were, like I said, 8 out of 9 were Windows users, but also because there's a tendency for new users to just be more accustomed to Windows rather than Linux, because that's what you end up using in school computers and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Hi, Giuliana. Thanks for all this excellent work. It's really great. What I particularly love is a methodology of giving the testers a hint first, just to help them along, and then if they still don't get right, they can go look at more detailed tutorials on how to do the part that they want to. Because if you do that, then you get lots of valuable data of where the documentation needs to improve and exactly which part of the documentation needs to improve. So I hope we can do more of this in Debian going forward, because it can really smooth things out greatly, and thanks a lot for that.
Of course, you're welcome. It was a nice experience for us too who were watching. I started using Linux 2 or 3 years ago, so I had to go through this process as well for one of my courses, which actually Tássia was the teacher. And I remember looking at the HTTP proxy and network mirror and being like, what is this? So this was also insightful to see, that there's stuff that we could change. Yeah.
A question, did you get any feedback with the Debian installer? I think we show the people a lot of technical information, and even if they just have to type return, for example, as you just said, with the proxy or their device names and what the partition is, were the people interested in learning this, or were they more scared, oh, there's something I don't know, what is a partition, what is a device name, and...
Yeah, so we had one tester that was a designer, and they weren't a college student, right? So most of our testers, they were computer science students, which means that for most part, they were kind of interested in learning because this would be valuable to them in the future. But for our designer tester, she didn't need the stuff, and it didn't matter whether all they wanted to do is get through the installation and have the system running so they can, I don't know, go on Firefox and do stuff, right? So there's a bit of both. There are some people who do want to learn and who are interested in knowing what all of this technical jargon means, and there are also those that just want to get the system running. So that's why one of our suggestions was to have a link with an explanation, because for the people who want to know what it means, you can always go and see the explanation, and for those who don't necessarily care about it, they can just look at the steps on how to do it, and then be done with it.
Yes, but what I learned when I helped some people doing installation, that if they see some information and have to make a decision, but they don't know anything about how to make the decision, that might scare them a lot. So then I would be very interested if you could do this test with more people that are not from a computer science background.
Yeah, this was a bit last minute, so we had the group of people that we were able to get, but also
So hopefully next year we will see you again with some more results.
Right. Any other questions? Cool.
I have a question to the audience. What else should we test? Because now we have a laptop for that. We need to make use of Debian resources. My intention is really, and actually Giuliana is not my student anymore, but we have a FLOSS club, so even past students are still around, and yeah, we have young people that want to contribute, and for us it's not hard to find volunteers among students and even elsewhere. But yeah, I would like to have from Debian, what do we want to test, to improve? Like the website, I think needs more usability tests. just the website, but what else?
I would definitely echo. It would be really nice to see some testing with people who do not use, are not computer students, because I think your usability will be very, very different, and I think they're going to run into a lot more problems. It would be lovely to have the website updated, as you were suggesting, with that sort of level of documentation. Maybe a guided walkthrough for the installer, but yes, you're right on the just give me just install it and give me. I don't want to know what's going on. Just install, and I'll take Debian's recommended defaults. Seems really good, but yeah, people who have never used it before, Linux before, are not computing students, and that brings us into the application space. You know. When somebody comes into something that they've never seen before, Windows, as you've already indicated, people have seen Windows, people know what to expect because that's what they've done previously. And there's a big familiarity thing going on. You know, just the fact that a word processor may be named something slightly different, a spreadsheet might be named something slightly different. How do users without a computing background finds their first few applications? Is there anything there we can look at to improve things? Maybe even just sort of putting some simple tutorial directly on the desktop of a clean install. You know, the just install button. If you go down an advanced installation, we can leave all that out, but maybe we need something, you know, give me a help of where to find things button. But how does it work with non-computing students? That would be really, really useful.
Just also to clarify, this was run on the first week of course of my Linux students. So the volunteers were Linux students on the course, but it was their first Linux, so they had no. Yeah, they were computer science students, but they didn't have, most of them didn't have any Linux background.
I work for an institution where we get mathematical students from all over Africa. They use Linux at our institute too, so if you want more testers from all over Africa, I can help provide them if that would help with the next study.
Right, this is the last thing that I want to show. If anyone's interested in taking a look, we have a repository that has everything. So we have like our tester instruction, observer instruction, we have all of our reports there, all of the forms that we made, images and stuff like that. So if anyone's interested, you can also take a look at the repository. It's on Salsa on GitLab, so yeah.
I think I just want to thank Giuliana and congratulate you because you were really brave. This project was set up 2 months ago, I think.
Like about a month ago. It was beginning of August.
It was really insane how much work we put on that in preparation to DebConf, and she was really brave to take the challenge, and we're really proud of the work. Thank you.
Thank you.